All right, Andy. Is the IRS 501c3 determination letter sufficient for tax-exempt purchases, or is the Secretary of State tax-exempt letter necessary?
There's apples and oranges here. So the IRS 501c3 determination letter, and they don't give you letters anymore, right? They just, it's part of your 990. As you put the 990 together, once it comes out, you get to the end of it and you decide what bucket you end up in. And so we're talking about a 501c3.
Oh, I don't think everybody knew that. I didn't know that. Interesting.
Yeah, they stopped with the letters a while ago. They send you an initial letter that says, congratulations, we've approved your application, everything looks good. But then from that point on, you've got 5 years to sort of prove out what section of the 990 you're in, what section. So it's the 170s, right? And so that's the thing, and that confuses people too about what your determination letter is, because the original one says it's just you're waiting,
right?
And then from that point on, it's the 990, and I'd say probably 90% of funders or people asking for money have no idea that changed in 1996.
No.
So that's part of it. But so what that does is that makes you so that you do not have to pay federal taxes on the difference between your revenues and your expenses. So at the end of every year, you have some revenues and you have some expenses. If the revenues are higher than expenses, that's typically called profit. And for every business that isn't a tax-deductible 501c3, that profit you end up paying taxes on. So you pay taxes to the state, you pay taxes to the federal government. What the 501c3 does is says you don't have to pay federal taxes. That's all it is. You don't have to pay federal taxes on profit as a nonprofit. Confusing, right?
Yeah.
That has nothing to do with sales tax. Sales tax is a completely different animal. In Nevada, you have to apply. So you apply to get your sales tax exemption, and the rules for getting your 501c3 and the rules for getting your state sales tax exemption are completely different. They do not correspond. So you have
They're not interconnected.
They're not interconnected. Yeah, you don't automatically get it. You have to apply. So number one, you have to apply. It's a different process. Number two, just because you're 501c3 doesn't mean that you don't have to pay sales tax on things. Yeah. So those two things are totally different, and I think that answers the question.
And I think what I hope is that the person who asked this, because I've seen a lot of organizations struggle with this, where they think, it's all a bunch of paperwork, and they just think, they don't understand the difference. And so they go to an office supply store and they bring their 501c3 letter, and the office supply store is like, no, this means nothing to us, right? Like you're trying to purchase all these office supplies. We need your state sales tax exempt letter, right? So making sure, and I don't think enough organizations, I see organizations do this all the time. I'm not sure about you, especially smaller ones that don't even think about the fact that they don't have to pay sales tax if they do have that sales tax exemption. And that always makes me nervous, because it's like, oh my gosh, you don't need to be, spending that extra money. So like, have that puppy readily available when you're going out to make purchases.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's a card. And even with it, it depends on who you're talking to at the store, right? Some people have no idea what you're talking about, and they make you pay sales tax anyway, and then you can deal with it later. Some places, like big places, have like a separate card that you need to do. So you don't bring that piece of paper with you every time. They make you get a card for the organization for that particular vendor. And then you bring that card in. And another thing, this isn't the question, but something that everybody needs to think about too, is if you have property, if your organization buys property, you can get exemptions from property taxes, but it's not retroactive. So you have to do it when you buy the property. And I've seen tons of organizations. I look at their 990s and there's a line for property tax. And I said, what are you doing? You don't have to pay property tax, but if you didn't get that exemption when you purchased the property, you screwed up, and there's no way to go back and get it later.
Oh,
so
boy.
just throw that one in there
just to complicate things further. Woohoo!
Nonprofit governance.
Nonprofit answers.
Nonprofit board. Nonprofit management.
Nonprofit marketing. Nonprofit resources.
The Alliance for Nevada Nonprofits presents Nonprofit Everything, the podcast about everything nonprofit, with your host, Andy Shurik and Stacy Wedding.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Nonprofit Everything. One of the things I've never really done, I don't think, is introduced Stacy. So Stacy is the owner? What do you call yourself?
Whatever. I don't know. Call me whatever. Chief cook and bottle washer. I don't know.
Of Professionals in Philanthropy. And we're delighted to have Stacey with us. She provides tons of amazing information, as you know, if you've been a longtime podcast listener. But
and Andy likes to disk with me, right?
Yeah,
to disagree with me sometimes.
I think we make a pretty good team.
I think we do. I think we see things from different perspectives, and
if we like agreed on everything, the podcast might be even more boring than it is.
Boring.
Plus, we like to have fun. But thanks for joining us. So the way this works is you guys send us questions. You all people, anybody, doesn't have to be guys, send us questions, and Stacey and I will answer them. If we don't know the answers, we will rope in a guest expert to try to answer those questions. And the questions can be about anything, preferably nonprofit questions, because that's kind of what we know the most about. And that's kind of the purpose of the podcast, which is presented by the Alliance for Nevada Nonprofits, which is the State Association of Nonprofits for Nevada. And if you want to support the podcast, there are some great ways to do that. Number one, you can subscribe. That's the easiest. That way it shows up in your podcast app every other Wednesday. There is a brand new episode, and so it'll just pop up ready to listen to. You can also join the Alliance for Nevada Nonprofits, which is a really good way to support the podcast. So you get all of the, in addition to supporting the podcast, you get all of the benefits of being a member of the Alliance for Nevada Nonprofits. Today's episode is sponsored by Brenda J. Stout CPA, a full-service accounting firm specializing in nonprofit tax compliance and IRS problem resolution. Find out more at brendastoutcpa.com or check the Nonprofit Everything show notes for contact information. Thank you, Brenda J. Stout CPA.
Thank you, Brenda. On a board where a group of high-powered and high-drama ladies run the annual fundraising gala. These ladies seem to control everything, and in my opinion, we have the tail wagging the dog. Our ED is about to leave because she doesn't have a board chair that will stand up to them. We have added more professionals to the committee to try to change the culture, but it's not working yet. Is it a lost cause? Andy, I don't know about you, but I'm sort of, furrowing my brows, cringing.
It just this feels so familiar, though, doesn't it?
It does. It happens too often.
It's like because you're stuck, especially because so the thing that concerns me about the question is that the ED doesn't have a board chair that stands up to the committee that's running the annual gala.
That screams problem.
And tail wagging the dog is a really good way to describe it too, because we've seen organizations like this, haven't we? Where it seems like the purpose of the organization isn't whatever its mission is, but it's to have a party.
Yeah.
And the party is the most important thing, and so that's what everybody gravitates to. I think the way you fix this, and I'd love to hear Stacey's opinion on this too. I think the way that you fix this is to figure out what to do instead of a gala. So if the reason that you're allowing these people to do it, the reason that the ED and the board chair don't have enough juice to be able to say to these ladies, stand down. We need to do these things differently, and this is why. It's probably because the gala brings in a ton of money.
Yeah.
Right. And because otherwise, why would you put up with it? If it's a dog and like nobody goes and it's not very much fun, then no one would care. You're like, yeah, you guys go ahead and do that. Right? But it seems like it's taken all the air out of the room. And the reason is probably because it brings in a ton of money. So you need to make sure that you figured out like what you're going to do to replace that. Like where the revenue is going to come from if that gala event ceases to exist. Because the other dangerous piece of this is that, these sort of high-powered, high-drama ladies running the fundraising gala, like I'm guessing that they're going to burn out on it eventually. Yeah. And there goes your big revenue source, if that's the big revenue source that you got coming in. So from a, it's, I don't know if it's sneaky or if it's just like if the ED can't fix it and the board chair can't fix it, and the organization is worth saving, then it's time to sort of pivot away from giant gala fundraising and let this be less important to you. So because if the organization isn't focused on it, if it's just something that happens, and there's the gala event, and because the ED has control over it. The ED can decide not to assign any staff to it at all. They can write it out of the budget. The next budget comes along and they're like, we looked at this, and as we ran all the numbers, we realized that it was actually costing us a lot more money than we thought it was. And I mean, seriously, run the numbers on any gala, and you can make that argument.
You can. It's interesting. I'm listening to you because I wouldn't have answered it.
With you.
I'm listening and I don't disagree theoretically, but I guess what's bothering me. So yes, I am incredibly bothered by a board chair that won't have that conversation. And that sort of begs the question long term of how do you either build up that board chair so they can have those difficult conversations, because that is what a board chair as a leader needs to do for the organization, or you need to get a new board chair. So at some point. So I think that is one longer term thing this organization needs to deal with. I guess the second thing that I'm thinking about is, guess what? These people on this committee, I'm assuming they are, this isn't a fair assumption. I'm assuming they're volunteers and not board members. And guess what? You can invite volunteers to leave, right? But I think you can tell them you're booted off. Guess what? We're firing you, volunteer. Now, nobody wants to, I get that people are probably listening to this going, but they're high-powered, high-drama ladies. I don't think that's the first step. I think the first step is sort of having that conversation with them, which it sounds like no one's willing to do. And including the person who wrote this question says, I am on a board where. But I want to know about the person writing the question. Like, if the board chair won't do it, then why not? Why are you allowing it either as a board member? Like, somebody has got to, and it doesn't happen publicly, right? You take these ladies aside. In an ideal world, executive director, board chair, or board member goes and takes these ladies to coffee, says, we appreciate your contribution, but this is this behavior we think is not helping outcomes, and there's a lot of divides. So are you okay? Like, can we shift that? Or is this just not a good fit anymore? Whatever. Like, I think there's a sort of warning step that needs to happen before you just fire.
Yeah.
But to me, it's like, someone's got to have this conversation. And so my problem, Andy, with what you're saying, I mean, I fundamentally agree there's too many galas and probably the gala doesn't need to exist. But my problem with what you're saying is it feels like it's a way to avoid, like, to skirt around an issue instead of handling it directly. Like, to me, somebody has got to handle this directly and give them a warning and ask them, and then see if they can get them on board, or like have some kind of routine that at the beginning of a committee year, like a new committee year, you sit there and say, hey, we're doing this new thing with all our committees where we're sort of setting some kind of ground rules and rules of engagement of how we as a committee engage at meetings and between meetings. So let's come up with that together as a group. And then as a group, they create this, and then they have something that they can each hold each other accountable. So I think there's things that can be done that don't mean throwing out the gala. And I don't know. I mean, maybe the gala does need to be thrown out, but I'm worried about just the lack of why are we scared in the sector to have these conversations, right? It's hurting everybody, and it's hurting. Now you brought all these new professionals onto this committee. They've got to be rolling their eyes and saying, this is the biggest pain in the butt. Like, I don't want to deal with these women, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're onto something there, because I think probably what I was thinking too is what is there a process way that you can fix this that doesn't turn into a personality way? Right. And so I think we're kind of saying the same thing. Yeah. Like, my process way is like sneaky and underhanded, and your process way is like, let's be direct, which I think is probably a smarter decision. But yeah, what is the way? Like, do you need to change the committee structure? Like, how do the decisions, I think is what you're saying, how do the decisions on the gala committee get made?
Right.
And do we need to codify that and make sure that everybody gets a voice, and it's not just like, the people that are the loudest and have been there the longest are the ones that get to decide everything. Exactly. Because if you can come up, and I think, the fact that you're on the board too, like, I'm on the board where, like, it is your responsibility to, like, is be backup for the board chair, right? And to come, find other members on the board that feel the same way you do, and then enact a change.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Grant writing for my nonprofit, and there's a question that always frustrates me. It's the sustainability question, where the funder asks what you'll do if you don't get their funding, or what you're going to do beyond the grant. Do you have any good suggestions about how to handle this question?
I hate that question too. I hate both of those questions. It always bugs me when I see them because I'm always trying to get into the mind of the person that's put the grant request together, like who's put the application together.
Yes.
So I'm trying to figure out. So what I assume they're saying.
And don't you think everyone is saying the same thing when they answer this question? Like, I mean, I just feel like it's kind of a no-brainer. Well, we fundraise. Well,
yeah, and well, you're also trying to sort of guess what they want to hear because in some cases, so there are big funders that like to only fund things that are game-changing initiatives or something that's a brand new program, and they're throwing big money at it. And so sometimes the true answer, and to answer the question, just put what the true answer is.
Yes.
Like just answer honestly. If in some cases, like you're going to a funder and you're asking them for money to build a giant new building, and it wasn't really in your plan, but that's kind of what they want to fund, and it would help, and you're just kind of shooting it out there. Like it might be legitimately okay to say, if we don't get this funding, we're not going to build the building, right?
Yeah.
It's like we're not going to redeploy our existing fundraising streams to try to cover this thing, which is totally not 100% necessary for us. But in other cases, in something, because you see it like in the CDBG grant, right?
Yes.
Where they'll say something like one of the questions that always shows up on that is exactly that. So like, if you don't get the funding from us, how are you going to do this program? And the answer is exactly what you just said. We're going to pay for it out of our other fundraising.
Right.
Like you're not special.
It feels like it feels like an insidious question. Like it feels like there's a no-win answer to this question,
yeah.
right?
That's why people hate it, right?
Yes. It's so frustrating. So, yeah, because if you sit there and say, oh, we have so much money that really it's not a big deal at all if you don't get our money. Well, okay, that doesn't make the funder feel special. And then, or it's not going to happen without you. Well, then that makes it you feel a little like it's a little bit of desperation. And is that good business sense? So, yeah, it's a tough question. But
So since you're more connected with the funders on this one, like tell me what are they thinking when they're asking this question? Why does a funder put this question on there?
I honestly think it is about, there's a couple of things here, right? They as a funder need to, whether it's check their boxes or just feel good about their investment, like this is a good, wise, sound decision. And I think, to be honest with you, a lot of times, depending on who the funder is, but let's say, for example, in a corporate situation, right? Where you have maybe a mid-level manager or someone that is not high up that may be helping influence some of these decisions. They need to kind of protect themselves with an answer that is, yes, this person, like, look, they said, even though they really bombed on this grant, but look what they put here. So I think some of it is just box checking, which sounds probably really yucky. But the other thing is, I think it's about just like, how do we make sure that this organization or this program isn't just like a fly by night, and that they actually really care enough about this, that they're putting, like, I think there's also that layer, like, do they care enough about this program or this request that they are putting thought, a plan, and resources behind it, that this isn't just I've pulled this, out of the air because I want to get your money funders. So I think that is like a really underlying piece of it too.
Yeah. Because it comes down to the like agency theory problems where you, as a funder, you're granting them the money, so you don't really get it back. So once it goes, it's gone. And so you want to make sure that you're deploying those funds in the best possible way. And one of the ways that you're doing that is by like asking, like, if we do this and we give you this money, is it just you're going to spend it and it's going to go away, or is it going to have some sort of long-term impact? Because they want the money to be, in an ideal situation, you'd think that they'd want the money to be some kind of seed that grows into something amazing and can solve a particular problem.
And I think sometimes sustainability, that this kind of question leads us right to money, right? And money is a piece of this question and absolutely has to be addressed. So that's where I think you get the opportunity when you're answering this to talk about what your fundraising, we have a development team, or we have an active fundraising board, or whatever that looks like, right? Something that you can say, and here's the way we generate different monies. And if you have some kind of earned income revenue source, great, like plug that in here, right? Because that helps sort of round out that diversification of revenue sort of piece of it. But I also think you get the chance to talk about the human like the human piece of this, right? So who are the people delivering these programs, and what is their expertise, and how are they staying innovative and sort of, a kind of ahead of the curve on new program developments to make sure this program develops over time with the needs of the clients. So I think there's ways to also take this beyond just, financial is a piece of it. And let's be honest, that's definitely what funders are looking for. But I think there's also a way to say, hey, here's how else we're sustainable. We have like a pool, a pool of 10 volunteers that at any given moment help deliver this program, and they're all trained and blah, blah, blah. Like there's another story to share there too that makes it beyond just financial sustainability, but overall sustainability so the program stays relevant and innovative and all that good stuff.
Okay, Stacey, what's the difference? This one's another trivia question.
Are we on Jeopardy?
Yeah, it's a Jeopardy. Well, let's see. No, because I'd have to change it and you'd have to answer it.
Oh, that's true.
So let's not do that.
Okay,
that's too confusing. What's the difference between a donation and a sponsorship?
Pretty straightforward. So sponsorships, usually there is some kind of material benefit the sponsor receives, right? So you'll see organizations that say, oh, you get a table with your sponsorship or this many seats to this event, this kind of recognition and signage and publicity. And because of it, so it's really a much different kind of transaction than a straightforward donation, right? That is just truly, purely philanthropic. Just, I want to give you a gift because I want to give you a gift with no expectation of something in return. Whereas sponsorship is very much sort of like that quid pro quo, this for that, like, we'll give you money if you give us this nonprofit in exchange for that. And that also changes, as you know, sort of tax deductions and what people can take as a result, because if you're getting a table of 10 to an event, you're not able to write off that full amount of sponsorship. And I think that's why you see most sponsorships and companies come out of their marketing budgets or something, that it's kind of a different pot of money than where they like grant money or give donations. Right.
Yeah, because sometimes, it used to be, you can't do it anymore. It used to be people would ask if they could pay out of two different budgets, right? They want the sponsorship piece to come out of one, the tickets to come out of one, and any sort of charitable donation they wanted to come from the foundation or from the community relations budget or something like that.
Yeah. And I think the only caveat, not knowing, I'm sure this was a pretty straightforward question, but I've sort of seen this trend where a lot of organizations are starting to do stuff like, oh, sponsor a child or sponsor this pet. And it's more just it's more of a marketing thing versus an actual sponsorship sort of tie. So they're using the word sponsor, but it really isn't. It is a donation. So I think it's just being, clear. If you're one of those organizations doing something like that, that's still different. Like if you're saying sponsor and it's just to get a donation for whatever program,
right.
But the person's not getting anything in return, it's still an outright donation, even if you're calling it a sponsorship.
Yeah, and it's funny. We got a catalog in the mail the other day, and it says you can adopt a tiger for $100. And my 6-year-old daughter found this, and she wanted to adopt
Probably
a tiger.
Excited, yeah.
I had a very long conversation with her about that doesn't really mean you get to bring a tiger home. Like $100 isn't going to pay for much, and I'm explaining the fine print at the bottom, but brings up the point that if you're using that in some sort of materials, if you're saying that you're going to sponsor a child or something like that, you also have to have in there that your donation is actually going to be unrestricted, that we aren't necessarily going to spend the money that you gave us on the child that's in the picture or the tiger that's in the picture, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It can get tricky if you're not careful,
especially if you have to explain it to a 6-year-old.
Oh God!
So here's another wrinkle, and this is an interesting another one where it's a simple question. We're going to make it super complicated.
Woohoo.
So the Tax Cut and Jobs Act that passed at the end of 2017, right? That changed some of the rule. One of the things that it changed is it doubled the standard deduction, right? So the number of people that are able to take a tax deduction, basically the number of people that are able to
give enough, right?
Yeah,
to actually get a deduction.
Right. You have to, because of the threshold, you're going to end up using the standard deduction, because even if you itemize, you're not going to get anywhere near what the value of the standard deduction is. Yeah. So that changed the economics for an awful lot of people. The percentage went from, I think, 20% down to, I think, 6 was the last one that they looked at. So the number of people that actually can take a deduction has dropped significantly. And when you're talking about businesses, specifically when you're coming into this sort of sponsorship realm, The donation, so say the company's an S corp,
Yes.
right, which means that they're passing through all of the donation. Any contributions get passed through to the individuals that are owners of the S corp.
Yes.
If it's a sponsorship, believe it or not, it then becomes 100% deductible as a marketing expense.
Yes.
So you actually get to cut the profit by whatever the value of the sponsorship it is, because you're getting something in return. So you're paying for something, which means you can deduct it.
Interesting.
If it's a charitable deduction, and you're taking the standard deduction, the charitable donation actually might not help you at all. So in some cases, and this goes totally counter to the kinds of things that we've been talking about for the last 20 years, which is when you would say to a charity, like, don't make it too complicated when you're doing an event. Don't create these giant sponsors. I think it was like 2 weeks ago we had this exact same conversation. Don't make these giant complicated sponsorship packages because the corporations don't want it. There now are legitimate tax reasons that you might want complicated sponsorship things, because it's going to be better for the company to take the sponsorship than it is for them to take the charitable deduction.
That's a really good point. And I'm thinking about it as, my business is an S corp, and I know the things that I classify under marketing and like client relations or whatever that is, whatever buckets I'm putting it under, it's a lot better for me as a business than it is like just doing the charitable, how I track it and say, charitable donation through my S corp. Because, right, I'm not if there's not enough of that, I can't write it off.
Yeah, I mean, and you don't know, like most charities, most nonprofits aren't going to really know what the tax situation is for the person that's giving them the donation. So it's again, the time that you want to have a conversation with them, which I think what we said about the sponsorship too, is to have a clear conversation with the person that you're receiving money from to say, what makes the most sense for you? So, if we give you this as a sponsorship, does that make more sense for you from a tax perspective? And the person you're talking to in the marketing
probably
department
has no clue.
They have no idea whatsoever, right? So, do we really want to get the tax department involved? Right?
Yeah.
So it could be a little bit more complicated, but it did add a new wrinkle that is sort of counter to everything that we've talked about over the last 20 years about these.
God, it's crazy how things change.
Yeah. Simple question, though.
All right, that's a wrap. We have finished another episode of Nonprofit Everything, and we wouldn't be here without you, our listeners. So thank you for joining us. As you know, you can always send us a question, and you can always check out our host, Alliance for Nevada Nonprofits, which is great for sort of underwriting this time and support for the community. So we hope you're enjoying it, and we encourage you to just spread the word, share this with a friend, share this with a board member, a colleague that has a question too, because the more the merrier, as they say.